see there's quite a good number of you here already, so I'm going to do this introduction. Welcome to this Academy of Healthcare Sciences webinar on physiological sciences and pathology. This is a series of webinars we've been running for a couple of years now and have been very successful, and the whole point is to highlight the amazing scientists that we have right across all three branches of healthcare science from all four nations of the devolved health services. So we're due to run from now until about quarter to two. We were originally going to have 3 speakers, but unfortunately one of our speakers is unable to attend, Dr. Zaibaa Patel. So we are left with the cream of the crop, our 2 best speakers. Well, they're all good speakers, really. So I'm introducing this instead of our chair, Professor Stephen O'Connor, who fortunately or unfortunately has been asked to be on a jury panel. And of course, you can't actually deny that and turn it down. So he's organised most of this. So he has to take all the credit for the great speakers that we have here and the session we're going to have. So we're going to do this in the normal way. We have our speakers, the first 2 or our 2 speakers speak first for about 25 minutes. We won't take questions at the end of each speaker. We'll wait until both talks have happened, so you can load your questions up in the chat. There is also the option of Q&A, but unfortunately I can't read that today. But if you use the chat or the Q&A, somehow we will get through to dealing with those questions. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Anna Barnes is the director of the King's Technology Evaluation Centre in London and is also a member of the Professional Bodies Council of the Academy. She's obviously a HCPC registered scientist in medical physics and is president of the Institute of Physics and Engineering, hence her role on the Professional Bodies Council. She's previously a principal clinical scientist in nuclear medicine from 2012 to 21 at University College Hospital, London, and the chief healthcare scientist for NHS England South East region from 20 to 22. So a very prestigious career and lead scientist. Her team at KITEC are a team of health technology assessors and medical statisticians in health economics, and are getting contracts from NICE, Medical Technology Assessment Committee, since 2014, and has undertaken more than 20 evaluation projects in the last 5 years. In 2020, KITEC was selected to become an evaluation partner for the AI in Healthcare Awards. And this is a large-scale, multi-million NHS-funded program aimed at accelerating both testing and evaluation of the most promising AI technologies for national rollout. Now, naturally, on a webinar about AI, we couldn't have a better speaker. So Anna's talk is titled "The Role of Healthcare Scientists in Health Technology Assessment for Innovation and Translation Using AI." Anna, it's a privilege to welcome you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for a wonderful introduction, Brendan. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Okay.
I can see your screen fine. That's all good.
Great. Okay. So yes, and I've recently also become the head of medical physics and clinical engineering at Guy's and St Thomas's on Monday. So another hat to wear during the day. So yes, really. So the title of my talk I've put here is "How Not to Be Worried About Artificial Intelligence Taking Over Your Job," but it's really also, as Brendan alluded to, that it's about the role of healthcare scientists in adopting and scaling up AI technology to improve our health care delivery and treatment. So it'll be primarily focused on radiology because that's my main specialism, but it's true of any AI technology that is looking at signals that are coming from the body, whether they be imaging or physiological measurement or histopathology slides. So what I wanted to start off with is just to remind you that you know, why would we think of artificial intelligence as being different to the automating of procedures to make our jobs easier at the moment? Why is there such a hype around all of this? Well, I think it's because we design these algorithms, computer algorithms, in order to do their own learning. I'll try and unpack that a little bit, and you know, so you can understand what that learning really means, and how it's not as independent or autonomous as we think it might, or we are led to believe. So here are some examples of some automated way of doing our work that already makes our workflow a lot easier. So this is an example of what Siemens call their whole body dot engine. It involves automatic recognition of an individual's anatomy and allows consistent settings for things that are important in MR, like spatial resolution, image contrast, and protocolling any breath holds that are needed. And it's usually based on the fact that you do a very quick scan of the body, and then it can detect through different intensity, voxels, thresholding, etc., of where it thinks certain anatomical important points are in the body, and then it references that and positions all the other fields of view relative to that position. And the way it does this is it uses loads of fancy maths. So it's not that the AI is anything new in this. So this is all going on, right? We use all sort of summation, series, thresholding, maximization, algorithms, etc., etc. But you know, you don't need to know all of that to know whether or not something's being used safely, because it's all about what are the inputs and what are the outputs. And we often talk about that. Oh, before I go on to that slide, sorry, I just wanted to say, and here's an example. Okay, so here's all the what I gave you before was the equations, and this is an example of actually what happens is, so you have a very noisy image, and your brain can already probably make out that that's actually an image of a face. But what we get the computer to do using conventional statistics is we start getting it to look for high and low spatial frequencies, and we start piecing it together and extracting what we call those features of the image. And here's an application to brain imaging where we take a noisy image or that's got a lot of information and we start breaking it down into different spatial frequencies based on intensity, voxel intensity thresholds, and we end up with this beautifully segmented brain, which has got the 3 different tissue classes we're interested in, which is grey matter, white matter, and cerebral spinal fluid. So actually, these black boxes already exist, right? But what I think, and it's not such a bad thing that people have started asking these questions, but what's actually behind these black boxes is a similar build of fancy mathematical equations that are programmed into the algorithm that's run by the computer. The difference here, and this is what I was alluding to about the learning, is it's not that the algorithms that, sorry, the equations that I showed you previously are fixed for looking for very specific properties in the image that we know are there. Okay. When we start using AI, and it's particularly these deep learning algorithms, what we're doing here is that we are, and so this is a graphical representation of all these equations that I showed you earlier, is that we can start to weight these features in a way that allows the computer to distinguish between one kind of feature and another kind of feature, and whatever feature we're more interested in, it will highlight and start to split into the groups that we've asked it to, and then we can look at that and see how correct it's been and whether or not it's picked up particular features that align to a particular group. Now, the problem with this sometimes is that you can't reverse engineer. These layers, these subsamplings get so complicated that actually in order to build the picture to see what it has separated these images out into it and put them into different groups is quite difficult. And I think this is where we get a bit nervous. So really what we have to do next is make sure there is a clinical correlation. For those of you who are involved in imaging, there's always a bit of a chuckle where the radiologist says, oh, I can see this and I can see that, suggests clinical correlation. Well, actually, it's no difference with the algorithm, right? So the computer will say, well, okay, what I noticed was this is really different in this group to that group, but it won't tell you why. It won't tell you anything about the clinical significance or relevance of that difference. So just to summarize, instead of us programming the algorithm to find these features, the algorithm, this deep learning algorithm, can discover what those features are. Okay, that will tell us what parts of the anatomy or how to differentiate these groups. And as I said, it's incumbent on us then to clinically interpret those differences that have been discovered. But therefore, do we need to think about this differently to the way we introduce other technologies into our lives to make our jobs easier? Well, no, I argue no, we don't. We do this in exactly the same way. And what we need to do as healthcare scientists is tell our healthcare professional colleagues that we've got this. We've got this. We have been looking after automation techniques, new ways of speeding up our work for decades now, and that we already know what processes we're going to use in order to start introducing this tech. So what are those processes? So we know that when a new piece of technology gets introduced into routine clinical use, there are these 5 pertinent questions. So we've bought this piece of kit, it does what it says on the tin, but now we have to work out, does it work? Does it integrate into our own system, our way of doing things? Does it work? Does it integrate into the way we deliver our healthcare currently, or do we need to start thinking about how we change it? We need to think about education and training of our staff and possibly education of our patients in the same way that we do with informing them about things they need to do when they come for their diagnostic tests. And also fundamentally, I put clinical effectiveness here, but I mean that in terms of also system efficiency. So is it effective within the patient pathway? Does it get them to a diagnosis quicker? Does it allow them to be discharged quicker, etc.? And finally, sustainability. And what I mean by that is will it still work when the person who's championed it has left? We all know those bits of equipment that after the lead consultant has gone and worked at a different hospital, that it just sits in a cupboard gathering dust. So we really don't want that to happen. So these are the 5 questions you need to ask yourself when a new piece of kit, whether that's AI enabled or not, turns up on your doorstep. So what do we do? So again, I'm speaking very much from my medical physics point of view, and I'm talking about radiology or in radiotherapy. So what happens when we get a new imaging scanner, which may or may not have AI in it, same with LINAC. So usually we'll do something like we'll take some phantom measurements, we'll check the field of view, we'll check, the activity that has been delivered, the dose delivered. And then we'll numerically check that it gives the correct answers. What we're expecting for might be the size, shape, uniformity of those phantoms in the imaging field of view. We'll also be looking safety-wise. Has it recorded and given us the information around ionizing radiation? It's very important around IRMA. Or for MR and ultrasound protocols, we can actually, instead of using phantoms, we can actually do this on normal healthy volunteers. And sometimes in nuclear medicine CT, we can start optimizing them on patients in addition to what they would have as their standard of care, or also simulated images, because at the end of the day, of course, the computer's just seeing a 3D matrix of numbers. It doesn't know what those things are supposed to relate to. Or for a piece of software, so you might do it so that the raw data, acquisition data is taken in, and you reconstruct it both in the old way and the new way, and you can compare them either just by looking at them as a radiologist does, or actually doing some numerical measurements. If it's treatment planning, you could do something where you look at the first treatment plan and then the second treatment plan and look to see if there's any differences and measure those dose delivered to target or organs. And then you would also do continuous audits post deployment as well, so that you notice any sort of systematic differences and then mitigate it against. And this is exactly what we do with any AI enabled tool. We would do exactly the same thing. And if you want a bit of help, go onto the NICE website, look at the evidence standards framework for digital health technologies. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but the things to take home are all about staff usability and the things those first 5 points that I made about integrating it into your way of working. So I use, alongside the evidence standards framework, I also use something called iitoolkit.com, and this was written by University of Cambridge, and it's just a really simple way of organizing your thoughts and making sure that you're asking the right questions all the way along. And of course, we need to evaluate AI because we always evaluate any kind of new technology that's being used to treat or diagnose patients. And as healthcare scientists, that is our job. That is what we do. It is our raison d'etre. So I split up the evaluation into 3 different stages. So there's the technical side of things. So does it do what it says on the tin? So usually by the time we've got the piece of equipment we've bought, this has all been done by the company and papers and sort of pilot stuff. But sometimes you might be fortunate enough to be involved in a research and development project where you're actually helping the clinician or the designer curate the material that goes into their models and trains the models, and then you're checking it when it comes out the other side. The next stage is what I call the clinical evaluation, and that's really where we're looking at the effectiveness. And so what I mean by effectiveness rather than efficacy, because I would say that the efficacy goes in the technical side of things, which is about accuracy. Here we've got the effectiveness. So how much of a difference will it make to that patient? As I said, do they get diagnosed quicker? Do they get to their treatment quicker, etc., etc.? And if it's a diagnostic, you start to want to look at the sensitivity. And also, this is very important bit here, fit with sight, which is your physical environment, so your resources that you have at your disposal are going to mean that you can use this piece of kit. I mean, I'll just give you some sort of a gross extreme example is there might be a lower middle income country that wants to install an MR scanner, and they say, well, all of you people in the West have it, why can't we? This is health inequity, etc. But then it turns out that their electricity and water supply are not stable enough in order to have an MR scanner. And that's on the big scale, but you can have a similar thing in your own hospital or a community site. And I came up against this a lot when we started talking about community diagnostic centres. And no, you can't just set up a respiratory lab or an auditory lab in Boots down the road, because you need special equipment and the way you prepare the consulting rooms. The next thing is the cost. And this is usually where my team, Kitech, usually get very much involved. And then here you have to start thinking not only about sensitivity, but in relation to the specificity, because as soon as your false positives go up for diagnostics, then you're incurring more costs. And for the and how have you improved the system? And this is, have you sped things up? Have you got, and then you can start looking at staff benchmarking as well, and evaluation, where do you have less days off sick? Do you have recruitment and retention stability, and things like that, and changing roles, better job satisfaction as well, where you're sort of being able to operate at your the maximum of your skill set that we're all being encouraged to do at the moment. And then the sustainability, as I said before, which is, if that key person walks away, is it still going to keep working? So this is just a silly cartoon version. So I'm going to give you an example now of a radiology based AI, which simply categorizes CT scans into, is there a fracture and is there not a fracture, which is this cartoon I've got here. Okay, there's a lot of words on this slide, and I'm going to talk to it for a little while. So what I first do when I build an evaluation plan around a piece of kit is I categorize the information I have or want to get into the following 6 sections. One is describe the solution. And in this case, it's an AI-enabled algorithm to detect vertebral compression fractures opportunistically in CT scans of this area of the body. Okay, and there are hundreds of thousands of these done every day all over the country for all sorts of different reasons. Very few of them are done specifically to look for occult vertebral compression fractures. So when I say occult, I mean they might be symptomless or there might be some vague back pain, but the person doesn't know they have them. Okay, why bother? What's that about? Well, I describe the clinical need, or rather the developers describe the clinical need, is that a vertebral compression fracture in someone who is maybe in their 60s is indicative of something being wrong. They haven't just had an accident. They've had something wrong. Their bones have started to get soft, and it's probably a sign of osteoporosis. So then you can refer them to the fracture liaison clinic where they can have treatment and hopefully prevent any further problems with their spine or other parts of their skeleton. So what happens at the moment? So you have all these hundreds of thousands of CTs are done. They're reported by radiologists, and at the moment there's always a backlog, right? We know that in all our hospitals there's a backlog. The common practice around incidental findings and what you do with them is not standardized, and that's fine because each local place will have their own way. They'll have thought about their own way of dealing with it, and there are lots of reasons why you wouldn't just automatically want to refer to whichever diagnostic service that you think might be appropriate. We had to understand the existing PAC structure and IT, because you always have to bring in these additional software. And usually what happens is the AI algorithm, so the model, the images that make up the model sit outside of your hospital in a cloud, and actually it's much quicker to run these algorithms, which take up a lot of computing power, in a separate server rather than trying to chug away on your desktop or one of the hospital computers. So we need to understand about IT infrastructure. We need to know how the hospitals divvy up their reporting. So you might have a general radiologist who'll read everything, but you might, if you've got one of these kind of CT scans and they're being read by an oncology radiologist, they're not going to read the MSK part of it, the skeletal part of it. So then that would have to be pushed to a different list for someone who specializes in skeletal reading, and you're possibly creating another barrier there. And then also you have, and with anything with imaging, well, any kind of med tech really, you have what's called the acceptance testing, right? So you've got your standard specification of what you've bought, and then you tweak it and tune it in order to be working at the maximum perfectness that you possibly could. For instance, if you're installing an MR scanner, it usually takes a week to do all of the testing, acceptance testing, and then another week to do the analysis. It's usually about 2 weeks to work out the perfect operating specification, and that's true for AI as well. So you would put aside a curated test data set, so that when you started the program, you've already got, you'll have a mixture of known fractures and known normals, and you put it through your algorithm and you check that it's giving you exactly the same answer, categorize them exactly the same as the humans did before you start running this for real. And probably you would start running this in parallel with your normal structures, just to sort of understand how it's going to perturb the system. So the kind of evidence that we therefore need to collect in order to do the health economic evaluation was we needed to have the patient's consent to let the AI algorithm run on their scans. And that was done, interestingly, that was done automatically as they came into the clinic for radiology, I think. And then we looked at the sensitivity and specificity. So it was humans versus AI. And we also did some qualitative research and talking to patients about how do you feel about an AI being left to detect your fracture or not. And all of them agreed that they'd want a proper trained radiologist to check the result afterwards. And then taking on all of these metrics and considerations, we are then in the middle of writing our report at the moment to give a recommendation, and also finally you sit down with the people, the staff really, and we talk about how, if you were going to now deploy this, how would you do it and how would it become part of your routine day? And that takes some time as well, because sometimes you'll have to change practice. And in this case, you had two different departments. You had the radiology department and the fracture liaison service, and they didn't know each other. And this is one of our things about working as silos. And every single time I had to say to them, have you spoken to your medical physicist in radiology about this? And inevitably, they'd always said no. And so I suggested that maybe they got the healthcare scientists to get involved and sort of help stick all of this stuff together, because, you know, we're scientifically trained, we have research methodology, and we're very good analytical skills. So I do keep reminding everyone, when you're doing these evaluations and adoption and deployment, you have to make sure that you've got your relevant healthcare scientists in the room at the same time, because they'll sort a lot of this out for you. So yes. So the things that came up were that when this squiggly line down here, ignore the names of the countries, that's not what's important here. Actually, what we did was we looked at all these timestamps along the data information pathway, and we were able to show that there were certain bottlenecks at certain stages within the system that didn't have anything to do with the performance of the AI at all, but actually were much more about the way the infrastructure, either technically or because of staff, that would hold things up. So you'd speed up one bit, but then it would just get shifted. You just get a pile up somewhere else. So we had to carefully map. We do this pathway mapping, which is all about the flow of the patient and the information that goes with the patient. Where is the problem? So for the metabolic doctors who wanted to be able to detect osteoporosis early, that's their problem. But for the radiologists in the radiology department, they didn't really see that there was a problem. So you're doing something to the radiology department that they didn't think they needed. So there was quite a bit of work there that we did qualitatively around focus groups and workshops to understand what they normally did to deal with incidental findings, and how would they feel about an algorithm helping them with those incidental findings. It wasn't resoundingly a round of applause, I should say. We also, as I said, spoke about patient acceptability, and mostly patients are uncomfortable about a machine being left totally to diagnose them, but they were also happy to experience having a false positive result and having a couple of extra tests than they were to think that something was going to get missed. And this is a balance, of course, that universal healthcare and patients will always have, because of course the opportunity costs. If we start unnecessarily investigating or adding new diagnostic tests on people who don't really need it, that means costs go up in that area, and we will have to cut back somewhere else. Work around if the algorithm flagged a vertebral compression fracture, how was that flag going to get dealt with? Did it need to be triaged by the radiology department, or did it need to be triaged by the fracture liaison clinic? The reason that's important is because they hold different budgets. And what we weren't able to do really is to feed into this evaluation which was the long-term health outcomes. Because if you start treating someone in their 60s for osteoporosis, you're probably preventing a more serious fracture maybe 10, 15 years down the line. Of course, we can't run a trial for that long, so we had to look at existing data on the rates of fractures within 70 and 80-year-olds, etc., etc. So it was a really big piece of work. We'll be finishing it this spring, but I hope that you can see that it's not any different from the way we should be thinking about introducing new ways of doing things anyway. And it's very much about quality improvement program than it is about R&D or anything, any sort of cutting edge research. And as practicing healthcare scientists at the front line, we need to be right in the middle of this, telling people what they should be measuring and how to measure it. In my team, I have healthcare professionals, which include healthcare scientists. And then I also have people who are trained in stats and economics. I also have someone who's a qualitative researcher, so that's in organizational change and behavioral science. I have someone who particularly works in data and visualizing data. And then the people who bring it all together are health technology analysts who have various backgrounds, some of which are healthcare science, biomedical engineering, clinical engineering, medical physics, etc., etc. So I hope I've given you a whistle-stop tour on why I think healthcare scientists need to be at the very heart of this kind of evaluation of introducing new technology, including AI, into current healthcare services. Here's my email if you want to get in contact with me, and our website address. So thanks so much for listening.
Anna, thanks very much indeed. Is that what you do?
Yes, that's what I do.
I see you at professional body council meetings and, you know, all this work you do. And yet, as you've just said, procurement of whatever healthcare science service we're doing is pretty much that pattern. But yours is on a slightly bigger scale than everybody else, I think. Thank you very much. We'll take the questions after the next talk. So we'll kind of hold fire on that. I've got some, so they're not going to be too challenging. Don't you worry. Okay, that was fabulous. So our next speaker is Professor Allan Wilson, who is a consultant biomedical scientist and the clinical lead for the Scottish Cervical Screening Programme. So Allan was elected president of the IBMS in 2019, and he took up office from January 2020. And he served his term, lucky him, during the COVID pandemic. However, such is his leadership skill set that he handled many of the media inquiries, appearing frequently on national TV and TV channels. So this webinar is going to be a doddle. I mean, let's face it. So Allan's worked in cytology laboratories for more than 48 years, covering all aspects of the service. He was awarded an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists for his services to cytology and screening, and he's honorary professor at Robert Gordon University. As the clinical lead for the Scottish programme, he's delivered clinical advice to screening professionals across the programme, including GPs, gynecologists, public health consultants, and he chairs the steering group of the Scottish Government directed national audit of exclusions from screening. So he's up there leading at a national level, as well as obviously his own department and services. He's lectured on gynecology and non-gynecological cytology in local, national and international meetings, including New Zealand, South Africa, Belgium, Kenya, Holland, Spain and Italy. So very much an international speaker. So Allan, welcome. And I'm going to hand over to you for the next 25, 30 minutes or so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brendan. Can everyone hear me?
Yep,
yes.
All good.
Good. Okay, right, we'll fire on then. Thanks, Brendan, for those kind words. I'm going to speak to you today about a more specific project that we're trying to organise. Although this is specific to the department I work in, it has national implications in it. This is a system that we think would significantly help not just the screening programme in Scotland, but across the UK.
You're on mute at the moment. We've seemed to have lost your sound signal. It says it's on mute on the screen, but
that better?
That's it. That's sorted.
Not sure why that happened. Right, okay. So as well as being used, so I'm going to speak to you mainly about the use of AI in cervical cytology, but there are specific other uses we use it for in the screening program, and work is gathering a pace with many groups working on the use of other AI and other screening programs, and perhaps the two most promising are diabetic retinopathy screening to assist in the diagnosis of glaucoma and macular degeneration, and also mammography. And there's a range of projects now ongoing looking at mammography and the potential use. The signs are very promising in that there is an increased detection of early cancers that may potentially have been missed by a manual assessment. However, there is an issue about over-referral as well, and almost false positive diagnosis. So like any screening program, we have the balance between sensitivity and specificity, and we're working with our commercial partners and the companies and the labs who are using this technology to try and ensure we can get that balance at the sweet spot. Diabetic. This is a particular quote from a paper from a few years ago, but in effect, although many groups have published robust diagnostic information for AI algorithms for diabetic retinopathy screening, future research is required to address several challenges. And I put this up simply because it has got implications for every screening program and every AI technology. It's about the ethics, the medical legal implications, the ethics, and how we roll this out to make sure we leverage the best use of this new technology. And I think ethics is a real issue for this, and the medical legal implications as we move forward to using this technology diagnostically. Who takes the, I'm not using the word blame, but who is responsible for false negatives, false positives when as inevitably happen in every screening program. So if AI and the main reason for we're looking at some of these both in screening programs and elsewhere is the potential benefit to those areas with shortage of specialist staff. And I've mentioned here radiologist is a particular shortage specialty, and the potential of increasing capacity, reducing turnaround times from the use of this technology. But the work is ongoing, and I'm sure Anna can speak more about this than I can, but certainly I'm well aware of the work that's taking place in Aberdeen at the moment, where there's the tremendous work happening at the moment and more in the pipeline. I touched briefly on AI and histopathology before I move on to cervical cytology. So digital histopathology is widely used in the UK, but this really isn't AI as such. It's just digitization of the histopathology slides and allowing the histopathologist to report based on looking at high resolution monitors rather than using the microscope. So in the not too distant future, we'll be looking at pathologists without a microscope on their desk, which is a slightly odd concept for some of us that worked in cellular pathology for many years, but that is the direction of travel. And certainly within my lab, we've got 16 pathologists all using the same high resolution screens, input devices, and software to look at their images, their workload digitally, and basically a significant amount of our work now is being reported using digital images rather than microscope slides, and that work is going on across the country. But this isn't, as I say, particularly AI. It's just presenting the sections in a different way. What I'm going to describe in cytology is about a more selective approach to it. So it is using AI to identify the areas with abnormal cells may lie. And importantly, this year, the National Screening Committee for the UK National Screening Committee approved the use of digital histopathology for biopsies generated from the cancer screening programs. AI is in development, but not yet used in the UK. But certainly there are numerous projects ongoing. There are numerous commercial partners working on this, and in Scandinavia, this has already been implemented in some areas in Scandinavia. So this is work that is generally moving ahead, and eventually, particularly for areas such as the dermatopathology, then there's absolutely no doubt that in the future some of these cases will be reported using AI. Okay. Now on to the project I'm going to focus on. So this is really about the introduction of a digital cytology system. So a bit of background to where we are. In the Scottish cervical screening programme, we've actually been using AI before we probably started using the phrase widely. So we used the hologic imager system in labs since 2012. So 12 years we've been using this system now, and the principle is much the same as the Genius system that I'm about to tell you about, which is slightly newer. But in effect, this digitizes the system and selects areas for the screener to look at. So it digitizes slides, selects the areas that are more likely to contain abnormal cells, and directs the cytology screeners to look at those areas. And if they don't find anything in those areas, then the slide is reported as negative. There's no need to review the whole slide, and it's gives us an incredible amount of additional capacity, increased our accuracy and sensitivity, and reduced the amount of false negatives. So 12 years ago, we networked this across the consortium. So all labs had access to it, even the smaller labs. And since we moved to HPV primary in 2020, the 2 labs are now using this system. And Scotland is the only part of the UK where this scanner is used for screening programme samples. And we validated it and published it in a peer-reviewed journal. So the next step in this, we've been using this for 12 years, but one of our issues is that the company now has effectively said they're not going to support it in the future, and the alternative they see is the digital system that they have in the pipeline, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So when we went to market for HPV primary, and that included all the HPV testing platforms and the cytology processing equipment, we included image-assisted screening in this. So we included that in the tender exercise that we went through. And Hologic offered the Genius system, which I'm going to talk about as an added value proposal. And so we went live in March 2020. As I said, a lot happened that year, as you may recall. So it wasn't best timing to go live in March 2020, but we've been working for about 3 years to this point. So we went ahead. And we had the Genius system installed in December 2020, but then due to our preoccupation with other issues that were ongoing at that time, we didn't really have much time to use it, but we started using it in 2021, and we've ramped up use since then. So what have we done? We've scanned more than 80,000 slides using this Genius system. We've done a retrospective study of 500 slides from 2014 and from 2017. Why we did that? Because we had the answers to speak. The issue about doing this prospectively in cytology is that we sometimes have to wait very long to get the outcomes and to monitor the impact of a new technology such as this. Whereas the value of, because we had used the same stain for the last 12 years, we could take slides from the archive and put them through the system, and then we had the answers as such. We had the follow-up screening history, and we had the biopsy outcomes, so we could look and compare the output from the Genius system with that retrospective material. And the other reason we could do this is that because this system is it uses an AI algorithm, it looks for abnormal cells, and one of the main indications for this in cytology is a staining. So it's basically a stoichiometric stain, so it looks for the intensity of the nuclear staining. So it's very important that's done to a very high and standardized level. And I think this proved it by taking these slides from which, when we looked at them, were best part of 10 years old, some of them, the staining was still adequate and still sufficient for the Genius system to interpret them correctly. So we had that follow-up data, and we've also reviewed more than 5,000 slides from medical reporting, so parallel opinions on standard microscopy and using the Genius, and we've done that blinded to compare, and we're starting to do the follow-up on those now. One of the challenges we've faced is that since we moved to HPV primary, and we're not unique in this, there's the same pressures across the UK, we have limited primary screening capacity. Really what we wanted to do was a parallel blinded study on this to compare the results at the primary screening level, but we simply haven't had the primary screening capacity to do this, and if we'd engaged in that exercise, we would have significantly impacted on our turnaround times for the screening programme. So we haven't been able to do that really, and that's a real frustration for us, that we have the kit, but we don't have that resource to do that. We have trained all the staff in the new system, and we asked that to use it in a limited way, and we're also exploring a role for how we can do it, because we think this has got a specific application for training. So what is a digital process? So the glass microscope slide is digitally imaged. The whole slide, WSI, is captured and stored, and this image is stored in a server for retrieval. The image is reviewed at a local or remote location on a high-resolution monitor. We haven't really explored the potential of remote location yet. It's a possibility, and it's really just an IT issue rather than anything else. It's not a limitation of the system, but we haven't explored that yet. But certainly, we've used it locally to look at these images on a high-resolution monitor, and that's what it looks like. So some of these are commercial slides I've taken simply because they allowed me just to show you quickly what the system looks like. So we think this is the future for cervical cancer screening, and it allows us, in much the same way as we have been using the imager, then allows us to look at the slides, the areas where the abnormal cells are more likely to be found, but doing it on a high resolution monitor rather than down a microscope. So it stratifies the tiles, and I'll show you that in a minute. I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. And that's different from the imager system. The imager system that we use at the moment is random, so it simply takes a screener to 22 fields of view in a random order where it thinks there might be abnormal cells, and it does that for every, and this system will do the same. It does that for every slide, including the ones where there's no abnormal cells. It will still ask the screener to look at these areas, but it's random in the imager. But on the Genius system, the new system, it stratifies it into rows. So basically it shows you 60 tiles, and the first rows show you large cells with a low nucleocytoplasmic ratio, and the second one is small single cells, and so on. You can see it there. So it stratifies them, which is helpful, because if you know what you're looking for, you can then zoom immediately in on those areas. And it also picks up infections as well. So that's what it looks like in real life. That's a picture of me in my office during COVID, as you may have gathered, with the mask still on, and that's how we look. So we see the tiles there, and so you can then very quickly look in and identify the abnormal cells. You notice the screen is split, so you get the tiles on one side, and on the other side you've got the whole image, so you can move between the two. You can focus up and down, and if you see something of interest, then you can go onto the whole slide image and look around on the whole slide image as well. They are linked, and it works very well. So what's the workflow? The workflow is there. So nothing. The sample taker collection doesn't change. So it's exactly the same sample we take, exactly the same processing of the slide to create that cell circle, but the box in the middle is the one that's different. So that's the Genius. So it goes onto that system, and that scans the whole slide, and then presents the 60 tiles for assessment to the screener. And we keep everything on a server, and I'll come back to that, because that's certainly an issue that we have with any AI or any digital system that we use in cellular pathology. But once they're on that server, we can retrieve them at any stage just by reading the barcode. So that's it. So that's the Genius processor. So it can do a variety of things, not just cervical, and there's more projects going on to look at this, if this system can be used for immunocytochemistry markers as well, because there are some markers against, for example, P16 and Ki67, which are known markers, potentially cancer markers, and could it be used to detect those as well? It carries 400 slides. It's random access, and it's got pretty good software. It's pretty small as well, actually. It's not a huge. You can see the footprint of it there. So compared to kit and radiology and other specialties, it really is rather small, and it sits just neatly on a desktop. And it takes 2 hours to scan those 40 slides. We tend to use it overnight, much like we used the imager. Oops, sorry. So so effectively what it does, just that. So on an average cytology slide, there are tens of thousands of cells, and it reduces it to these are the areas that you need to look at in a platform of 60 tiles, which increases capacity, and I'll come back to that significantly. And that's been the main benefit of all this. If you're not having to screen the whole slide, if this technology allows you to focus on the areas where the abnormal cells are, it's not just increasing accuracy, but it's increasing our overall capacity by reducing the amount of time we have to spend assessing each case. So effectively, that's how it reviews, and I think I've covered most of this. It presents it in that format with the tiles on one side and the whole slide image on the other side of the monitor. It has to be a fairly high resolution monitor, but the cost of these now is coming down considerably as becoming as more companies come into the marketplace. Right, the server itself, and obviously there's an issue here because these are extremely memory hungry images we're seeing here, and it's the same with digital histopathology as well. We install servers in my lab just at the beginning when we started using digital histopathology a couple of years ago now, and those servers are now full, and we have to wait and see what the next stage is. There's a potential of moving on to cloud storage for this and for digital histopathology, but I think it's fair to say we haven't really tackled the potential, what we're going to do with these images, and how long we have to keep them for. I read with interest the recent RCPath draft guidance on retention and storage, which is on the website, and it talks about a potential strategy for this. But I still think there's work to be done in this, because if we're serious about keeping large amounts of these, then we are going to have to look very closely at how we store them, and do we need to store them all if we've still got the slides in files. So that's a decision that's still yet to be made. But effectively, that's what we do now. We keep them all on a server, and it works really well, and the access is almost immediate when you bung on that barcode. I'll come back to IT issues in a minute. I'm going to show you, I know there probably won't be many cell path people on the call, but I'm going to show a few slides just because I hate doing a presentation that doesn't actually show some cells. And I've only got two, I think, or two or three. And the first one I put up, apologies for the quality of these, but I'm putting up almost as an aid memoir for myself, because although I think the system is the answer for the future, one of the issues it has is that when, as in cytology, you get groups, large, dense groups of abnormal cells like we're presenting here, this system struggles sometimes to identify them. And also struggles to present them to you. If you're looking at something down in the microscope, you can focus up and down, you can look through it usually, whereas you obviously don't have that focusing ability. This isn't Z stacking. We're not doing that on this system. Z stacking would create files of a size that just would not make it operationally feasible. So these are, this is you only get a flat image of this and you can't focus up and down. So one of the potential weaknesses of these systems is the interpretation of these dense groups. Fortunately, we very, very rarely get samples where this is the only appearance of the abnormal material, and where we get large groups, we've also got the smaller groups and single cells that are picked up by the system. But the main advantage of this system is picking up these small single abnormal cells. Bearing in mind that we're looking at a sample, we're asking screeners to look at a sample that is containing tens of thousands of cells, and sometimes we are looking to detect literally a handful, or certainly less than 50 very small single abnormal cells sprinkled throughout a densely cellular sample, and it's no particular, and it's obvious now sometimes we would miss these manually, but this is what this system is extremely good at, is detecting these small numbers of atypical small cells and directing the screener to them, either in the imager system we currently use or in the digitized system that we're currently assessing. And these are just a last picture here of these small cells that this system is extremely good at, and that's really why when we moved to the imager system in the Scottish programme, we started seeing more of these and picking these up, and that's why our sensitivity rose and our false negative rate fell. So that's that. I think I've covered most of this now. This is basically just a comparison of the current imager that we use, and oops, sorry, it's very sensitive. Current imager we're using with the Genius system, and I think I've covered most of these elements. Although the other thing that this new system does is it gives us a cell count for each slide, which may seem basic, but it allows us to we do cell counts for adequacy. It's really very helpful, and we'll standardise the assessment of adequacy for these screening slides. So when we made the decision to move to the imager in the Scottish programme, say 12 years ago, a little bit more than that, we were the only part of the UK that did that, and this new technology was rejected in England by a study called the Maverick study in 2011, but we validated it in our own way, and as I said, had it published it in a peer-reviewed paper, and we think this has demonstrated significant advantages to the programme. So I think it is a time now to call for the English programme and other UK programmes, and this slide is slightly dated because actually now there is significant work going on to try and introduce. We're almost certainly going to skip the imager, but to move to Genius system, and there's now, I think, we now have, I made a submission to the National Screening Committee a few months ago for the potential introduction to this to the UK screening programmes, and at that stage I could get, I asked for and received support from all the screening programmes within the UK, and from the three main professional bodies, the IBMS, the British Association for Pathology, and the Royal College of Pathologists, who have got staff working in this area. So I think they need to look at this to address several issues within the UK screening programmes. I'm going to talk a little bit about workflow, and it's reflecting back on what Anna outlined in her presentation about it's all very well, system might be very good, but does it fit into existing workflows? Can it be practically applied within the setting that we want to use it within? So when workflow at the current arrangement, when we're using slides, is quite simple because everything follows the barcode on the slide. So if someone looks at a slide and then wants someone else to look at it, they pass the slide, you've got the barcode and you can zap that barcode and immediately see the clinical history and also who's looked at it and what opinions there are on there. But if you move to digital cytology, then it's not so easy. You don't have that immediate reference point of the barcode on the slide to access the information. And within the current system, we have the Genius system. I think that doesn't really exist yet. We need to look at how we manufacture, how we do workflow, almost a mini LIMS module or tracking system, some kind of tracking system within that, and that doesn't exist. So I think we're working with Hologic to see how we can get that software upgraded. And also, how do we do internal quality control? At the moment, again, what we do is a manual rescreen, or a manual pre-screen of every slide before it's assessed using the imager. But how do we do that once we've got once we've got the digital system in place? And we've got a few solutions, but again, it won't allow us just to do exactly what we do at the moment. So we do need, and we also need to look at how this integrates with our local LIMS and with our national within Scotland. We use our own national system called SCIRS, the Scottish Cervical call system. So we think generally it will give us significantly increased capacity, and there are limited data coming out the Queen's lab, but also from the Bristol lab, who started using this now, and from the London lab, that we think this is quicker and quicker by the extent that 3 to 4 minutes for a slide review using current systems, sometimes a bit longer, down to around about 1 minute. So a significant increase in capacity, and that will solve a turnaround time when services are particularly stretched for this specialty. So IT issues I mentioned, and I think I've covered this. So it's the file size, there's huge compared to other things that we store. And I've mentioned the potential of using the cloud. We have effectively, we've only one server required so far, but that server is now close to full, and we're looking at whether we can archive some data from it. Long-term storage is an issue. And also I think it's a struggle, and I'm sure many of you recognise this, is that we have within the NHS, I think we have too often work now on systems that block transfer of IT of images and data between sites. I think while accepting we have got significant information governance issues, sometimes information governance, I think, is now working against innovation, and it is something we have to work with our colleagues in information governance on. Networking has been an issue for us, and again, we work in little IT silos, and exchanging information between neighbouring even or national networks can sometimes be a challenge. And the other thing we are looking at this, if we had mentioned digital histopathology systems using high resolution screens, there's a significant overlap with the IT requirements needed for digital histopathology and digital cytology, and not only that, some of the operators overlap as well. So can we integrate and use the same screens and potentially the same servers and laptops and systems as well? And I think that's something we need to explore. Oops. So I'm going to move quickly through the next slide, a few slides. So the retrospective 2014-2017 study, as I said, it demonstrated there was a robust image of stain. We had to, one of our challenges was we're a bit Luddite still, we mark areas with marker pens that we want to go back to in slides, but to put these through the imager, we had to remove all those dots. So we simply put them in a photocopy. That may seem a slightly odd concept, and then reinstated the dots after the slides were imaged. We scanned them in the Genius system. We assessed and reported them based on that interpretation of the whole slide image, and then we compared with the original report, and we calculated the sensitivity and specificity. So we haven't got the results. We're still working on working our way through those results, and I think one thing that definitely needed to highlighted is I don't think we trained staff well enough in this, and I think we've reviewed how we train future, and we're currently doing that to try and set up training standards and programs should we introduce this within the UK, because I think we need to be sure. The issue was we had staff didn't have confidence when we started in this work, and didn't feel confident using the system. So I think it's a learning point for us that if you're going to try and it may seem rather a straightforward move, but if you've been used to looking down a microscope for 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden you're saying, no, you don't do that anymore, you look at these instead, I think this is probably quite a significant change for these individuals, and we needed to extend that training and get them more confident. And I think the other thing we need to do is learn from digital histopathology, where there was an individual validation, and I think that's what we need to do, is to work on individual validation for use of these, since these individuals are working individually, looking at slides, and we need to be sure that everyone is comfortable and confident using the system. So I think we covered most of this. So the workflow is fairly straightforward. So how do we use the Genius system? And so we use it's fairly straightforward in many ways, although the workflow again is what I've mentioned. This is something we need to work on. So scanning, we scan overnight. All slides are laid in late in the afternoon, and we complete the run in the morning. It fits pretty well into the daily workload, and the machine itself is extremely easy to operate and reliable. Sorry, this is not behaving. Yeah. So potential weaknesses, I think I've mentioned them all: the detection and interpretation of high-grade, what we call hyperhepatic crowded groups, so large groups of cells. Data storage is something we have to address, and the workflow I've mentioned already. So the benefits, and I've covered most of these, so it's the detection of small numbers of small cells and helps our sensitivity. It's efficiency and increased capacity because we can do this much quicker. It standardizes cell counting for adequacy. We've got significant issues with training at the moment since we centralized into large laboratories for HPV primary, and it's made access to training much more difficult, particularly for trainee pathologists. So we think this is a potential solution for that. And the other main advantage is that we have the potential, if we can get around the networking images, of networking and sharing of cases across the UK in effect. Not just for difficult cases to look for an opinion, but actually if there was a backlog of cases lying digitally in one lab, we could, if we had the infrastructure in place, we could be looking to address that on a national level without having to shuffle boxes of slides across the country. And we think this will give increased resilience as well for networking, from the networking. So last couple of slides now, I think. So the future role of the GGIS system, so it's immediate remote access to cases, the ability to pool and share limited cytology resources. And certainly since we moved to the large centralized labs that we have in the UK now, it's a particular issue for us around about resilience as key individuals retire. And it might be the solution if there's a further consolidation of laboratories in that would allow individuals to work remotely without actually having to relocate. This would give us a significant increase in reporting capacity and get challenging case opinions. Training we've covered, and I think there's also the what I've mentioned. We can use this for not just cervical cytology, but non-gynae or diagnostic cytology, and the brown staining analysis that I mentioned. You know, looking for markers and assessment of markers. So next steps, we're trying to get this validated, but it's been a struggle because of our capacity issues, but we've now submitted to the NSC. We're trying to work together across the UK to gather the evidence that needs to validate this in much the way that Anna described there, because we can't risk this putting a system into place that's not been fully attested and validated. But that's a real struggle given our capacity issues within the programme across the UK. So last slide now. So these are the people I've got to thank, particularly who helped and supported in this work, and also the support we got from our commercial partner, Hologic. And that's, if you want to look at any more of this, that's the Hologic. I've got a digital cytology website with lots of cases on there that you can go and look at it, and it's really well set up. So you can go and have a look there. And happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Allan, thanks very much indeed. That was fascinating. We had the sound was coming in and out, so the bandwidth of the signal wasn't brilliant throughout. But no, it wasn't your fault. But we're completely able to follow it. It was fine. It was really excellent. So, right, wow. So we have had some questions on the chat. I don't know if there's some on the Q&A side because I can't access it, as I said earlier, but I'll go through the ones on the chat to begin with. And I think the first one's probably was aimed at Anna, and it's from Sarah Peacock at Cambridge University. It says, how do we evaluate and implement AI in a collaborative manner? As you mentioned, departments and trusts have different budgets, IT, staffing constraints, so working together becomes hard, but each trust reinventing the wheel seems somewhat counterintuitive. Any advice, Anna?
But I'm not sure about advice, but Sarah, excellent question. And I have been asking this the whole 30 years of my career. You know, there's a reason why we don't all buy Siemens MRI scanners or all GE PET scanners, right? Because we all have our own reasons for wanting to go with the preferred vendor. If you're asking a more high level thing is, should AI be introduced for a particular service and then the hospitals can go away and think about it, then that really lies at the integrated care board level, and that's why they've been set up. I don't think they've quite got there yet. There's a lot of stuff to sort out before they get to this bit, but that's where the decision gets made. You're absolutely right about budget. Absolute nightmare. I spend a lot of time giving masterclasses actually to companies who want to try and get into the NHS. Hence the reason for things like the NHS England AAC collaborative on this AI award, which they've since stopped. But there are things like the medtech tariff, where you can go on to NHS England and look at a list of AI tools that have been approved, so to speak. So there isn't really an answer, but I do think it lies at the executive NHS level, and ICB rather than the hospitals. I don't think we should be reinventing the wheel. Professional societies play a role in being able to share best practice. You're always going to do your acceptance testing, commissioning, whatever piece of medical technical equipment you bring in, including AI. So you'll still carry on doing that. So it's the same old, Sarah. It's what we already have to deal with, but this time it's got AI next to it.
Okay, on the theme of collaboration, I'm asking a question here. So both of you have had to work pretty close with industry. And industry can be quite fickle because they obviously have, different agendas some of the time, to make profits and make sure they pay the people that pay them to do the development and everything. Are there any pitfalls or any bits of advice you could give to all of us about working with the industry, really, from your own experience? So I'll ask Allan to go first on this.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Brendan. And I think we and the example I just gave, the example of the Genius system is a good one in this regard, because we took this to the National Screening Committee, and the initial advice was, well, it's up to the company to present the data to validate. And I can see the logic in that in one point, but the pinch point in this isn't the company, isn't our commercial partner, because we still have to work with that limited staffing resource that we have to actually look at these. So that data has to come from there. So that it's putting this at the feet of the commercial supplier isn't going to help in that regard. I think the other thing is that we have within the screening programs, way screening programs generally work in the UK, is we tend to use the same kit, because the screening program would tend to standardize that use, but so it's not probably as fragmented as radiology and other specialties, because there is that attempt to try and standardize how we do it. However, there still are some variations, and I think there are some important impacts for companies. When we move to HPV primary, for example, there are companies that are almost frozen out the UK market because they didn't meet it. And I think that's another thing we have to be really careful about, and that these commercial decisions will have significant impacts for some of the companies, and we run the risk, I think, of moving to a few monopoly suppliers that I don't think is necessarily healthy, and the smaller companies being squeezed out. So I'm not necessarily a fan of the big managed service contracts. I think that's what it does. It moves us to monopoly providers. And I think that's a real risk for service delivery, irrespective of what field we're working with.
Yeah, stifling innovation is a big worry. Anna, you're nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you about the market monopoly, and that's why I said, there's a reason why we have each people get to choose which scanner or whichever kind of equipment that they want, which LINAC manufacturer to go with. And I don't think we'd want to do, you can only use this. We also did an evaluation on breast screening, and of course that came up, which was it's not so much can AI help in breast screening, is can this AI help in this breast screening? Because if it's breast screening, it's only going to be one vendor because they need to have it standardized. Although I would add that all the mammography machines are different. But anyway, and in this case, no, it wasn't good enough. But should AI be used to speed things up? Yes, but I think you have to decide how you're going to use it. You know, in the pathway, how are you going to use it?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, I think also this next question from Sarah Peel's a good one, and also on the theme, because you're working with industry. So she wondered how you deal with the fact that you can only evaluate the technology as it is now, but we know software is continuously evolving and being improved. How would we periodically monitor software as it's updated, particularly if it's using machine learning?
Yeah, so we would.
Anna.
Yeah, so we would do it the same way that we evaluate software updates at the moment. So again, apologies for using radiology, but both PET, SPECT, and MR and CT reconstruction algorithms are regularly updated. You usually get notification well ahead of time that there will be an update. You then get asked if you want to have the update. If it gets to the point where you have to have the update because they refuse to carry on looking after the machine, then you'll work out some sort of acceptance commissioning testing period, and then everybody has to go through the learning exercise again. All AI at the moment in healthcare, absolutely, in order to get its CE marking and adoption in healthcare, has to be fixed. It has to be fixed. We do not use any learning or generative AI at the moment, right? And if you want to do the next version of the model, then you call it version 2, and then you have to let all of your clients know, and then we have to then go in and you'll have to reevaluate it. So for instance, with you know, going through non-AI example, there have been lots of really cool new PET, that's positron emission tomography image reconstruction recently, and we spent 6 months looking at how it changed our images, and whether or not the doctors wanted to, the radiologists wanted to introduce it, and how they wanted to introduce it. We spent a long time before we decided to go ahead with it, and you would do the same with the new AI models as well. So you have to have your whole version control thing, your quality management system, everything. Just this time it's AI software, not the other software. That's all that's different. So yeah, there's nothing there at the moment that continuously learns. Alan, I don't know if you want to say something about that.
No, I think that's exactly right, and that's the same system. These are not the system we're using. The Genius system is fixed, so it's developed using some kind of network learning. But then once they've achieved what they think is the best solution they can, then they will fix it. And I think the only issue we've got to think about is that when they have a new version of this, and certainly I know there's a fear for some of the commercial suppliers is how they get it validated within the FDA. Did have to go through that whole painful process of validation again, and that's quite a jump. I believe the FDA have recently reviewed the practice, and they have got a kind of a much streamlined system of minor tweaks to make that process quicker rather than have to go through the whole FDA approval. But you're right, it is a whole new area that we have to be aware of as we move to using AI within our disciplines. One last thing I was just going to, before we go back to MSCs, just to go back to the original question about managed service contracts. And I think the other thing we have to be mindful is I've heard some recent examples of some really, really long managed service contracts, excess of 10 years, 10 to 15 years. And I think that's something we have to be really mindful of, given what we've talked about and the change that we're talking about now and how quick change is. Can we really forecast what our requirements are going to be in 15 years and tie ourselves to one supplier for that? So I think that's really something we have to consider.
That's very pertinent this week, as one of the IT companies have announced the quantum chip, which is supposed to be just, exponentially better than what we're using now. And that makes you wonder, will devices in the future be able to learn on the job, as it were, which will make the governance you've just been speaking about pretty tricky, actually. Okay. There's another question from, let me just see. From Sarah Douglas. So this is more about the human side of the services. Excellent talk. Should we be concerned about a general de-skilling of human workforce if AI becomes the predominant analytical aid used in our respective services? So I'm going to go with Allan first because of the dependency upon getting your slides, I think, in the first place.
At the moment, this new technology within AI is directing individuals to look at areas. So there's not really a de-skilling issue in there. So we're effectively, we still need that human interpretation of the areas. What it's doing is detecting the areas where that abnormality may lie and still using those diagnostic skill, morphology skills to interpret them. I think the next step, however, will be, and I'm sure, and probably more in histopathology, but potentially cytology as well, is that the next step will be, we think this one is negative entirely, and we don't think you need to look at it again. So there'll be a confident, and then there'll be a cut-off in the end. I'm sure there'll be models for this in radiology as well, looking at some slides and saying, we're confident this 50% are negative, so we think you'll need to look at these 50%. We haven't got there yet, but I think there's an inevitability. And then we really have to talk about the legal and ethical issues of that. And to a certain extent, yes, I think that potentially would involve some level of de-skilling then, because we are effectively replacing those human skills with AI technology.
Sorry, Anna, do you want to comment? I muted myself there.
Yeah. Okay, I could be really facetious and just say, look, does it matter that my 13-year-old can't use a rotary phone anymore? But actually being more serious for the moment, we do want to retain those skills, because we want to know if the aided the computer aiding us doing our job is doing it well, right? So I think that what I'd hope is that we see AI enabled tools as just that, tools. So what they're doing is that when they're making our job easier, it's more efficient, but you still have to go through the training at the beginning to understand what it is you're looking at. Like you want to say it's an AI algorithm that's really good at looking white matter lesions that could be indicative of multiple sclerosis. So you want that to be done quickly, right? But the person who's reading the scan needs to know why, what a white matter lesion is going to look like, and why it's important to see it, and what normal. So I don't think we should stop training our staff, because that fundamental knowledge still needs to be there. But then on the other hand, I don't know how to do, I only use high level functioning scripting programs like MATLAB and Python. I don't remember how to do the BIOS stuff that we used to do when Brendan and Allan and I were teenagers. I don't know how to do that anymore. But does that matter? So I think it's about mitigating. It's about doing risk management of it. What do we need to hold on to make it safe, and what can we let go of, because actually it's of no use to keep that piece of information in our heads. That's what I would say.
Yep, the bad old days of green typeface on a black screen. It was horrendous.
Big giant things that took up our cabinet.
Kind of leading on from the kind of the human factors in that people workforce feeling a little bit threatened. Both of you really. I think you touched on this, Anna. Really, is as it looks like to the patient, to the clinician, and to legal people that humans are being replaced by machines. Is that going to be a huge problem, or do you think because we're going into this reasonably gradually and with good governance and working these things through, it should be all right?
Well, I'm optimistic, because at the moment we're very clear that if you're going to use an AI enabled tool, it shouldn't ever be done on its own. It should always be done alongside and with the appropriately clinically trained professional. There's nothing out there that doesn't involve human in the loop to be used. Whether 50 years from now that's true, I don't know, because there'll be so much that will change in terms of how sophisticated and quick the algorithms are, and they'll be in the background continually improving and learning. I do wonder a little bit about the AI eating itself. So the more stuff that goes out there that's got AI in it, then it feeds back into the models. You see what I mean? It's like going in a circle. But I think that actually, Alan, what you said about the normals, so particularly in screening, because predominantly most of the things that are that are seen are normal, then I think that's probably the first thing that goes that will go to not being maybe overseen. Then you might have to have post-market surveillance auditing, which goes along to Carly's question about, so then what would be the pathway if there was an error? So say the AI missed that. I think, yes, it would have to be the same process as followed by human error. And I don't know. So for instance, if there's an interval cancer, so I know that for an interval cancer, breast cancer, when that gets flagged, then the consultant in charge will go back and look at those scans from a year and a half ago or whatever to see, was there anything there that I missed? So I think that's still the same thing. I still think that it will be a human who goes back and looks at that final that original scan to say, actually, no, the AI got it wrong. But it will be, yes. So yes, it would be the same way as we do it now, I think. Alan, what are your thoughts on the screening thing?
Yeah, we do the same exhaustive audit in cervical screening. In fact, I think the cervical screening program across the UK has got a more highly structured audit process than any of the other screening programs. And we look at this, and Anna, you're right, we go through the whole pathway and look, and would be the same process we would follow if we used the AI to look at this, and we would look at these. And I think we all of us remember, and there's a timely reminder of this on the BBC website just out today about a cervical screening incident in the UK, that no screening programme, even if it's delivered by AI, can be perfect. For a screening programme to work, there has to be there's some false positives and false negatives. That's the way screening programmes work, and I think we need to get that message across quite clearly. And that would same with AI. So irrespective of the claims, there will be some false negatives and false positives. No system can be perfect. And so and we have to just bear that in mind. And that's almost the agreement we tie into when we submit to screening, that screening can do harm, and AI is not going to reduce, well, it might potentially reduce that harm because it'll increase sensitivity and reduce false negatives, but it can never eliminate them. And I think the first issue we'll hit is the first test legal case we get where AI has missed something, and it'll be really interesting to see the outcome of that when it inevitably happens.
I like to your point, Anna, that people are comfortable with the false positive because it's more tests but no harm. And it's the false negatives are the ones you're really concerned about.
Yes.
Okay. Another question from Syed Sajjad from Nottingham University. I understand that much of the current focus on AI research within pathology is understandably directed towards imaging, as highlighted by Anna Barnes, and radiology by Allan Wilson in cytology. Could you share insights on where the current focus or key areas of research lie in applying AI to biochemistry within pathology? Possibly the data produced in the form of biochemistry results. Are there emerging developments or specific challenges that researchers are addressing in this field? So you may or may not be able to answer that because you're not biochemistry experts, but do you want to have a dip?
It's not my specialist area, I must admit. So, and I know that AI has been used in not just biochemistry but hematology to look at the analysing huge amounts of data. So it's almost the data analysis rather than actually the use of interpretation. But certainly, and I also know clinically we're using it. It's not quite the same, but I suppose clinically they're using some of that data to make suggestions of diagnosis based on complex biochemistry algorithms. And I'm aware that it's been used in areas where to look at that for monitoring of biochemistry results. But that's only from some very rough conversations with our biochemistry colleagues. I'm not really aware of much else beyond that. It's not my specialist area, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think Said's answer is probably, if he goes back and looks at the previous webinars we've done on AI, shows the breadth and the way that people have tackled the challenges. So we shall put you in that direction, Said. Another question from Rajiv Narma. I think AI is helpful, but final human specialist interpretations, diagnosis, stroke intervention will be most valuable here. So I think it's what you've both said. You're never going to lose the human aspect because we're the smartest computers of the lot.
Yep.
Another comment or a fantastic webinar so far. Thank you. There's lots of discussion surrounding the ethical and professional issues surrounding AI in healthcare, but not so much on the laws surrounding the usage of it. Are the legal aspects of AI in healthcare being given less attention or priority compared to ethical and professional considerations? Quite a tricky question, that. Anyone want to pick that one up?
I think there is certainly, I think the ethics analysis and illegals have a catch up. So this is, we've already identified as fast moving industry AI and where it's being used. But I think the ethics of this and how the use of AI and the legal implications of it are still playing catch up, and it needs to catch up pretty quickly, because this is going to, we're going to have some cases soon, I think, where there's going to have to be a legal opinion.
Anna?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question. So at the moment, no AI enabled equipment is allowed to be used without a qualified healthcare professional. If you're talking about ethical and legal, I go back to my first point. What makes the AI different from the automated tools and analysis we use now? Right? So no, it's not that it's not being talked about. It's just that I think there's a misunderstanding of what AI is for a lot of people. And what we're talking about here now is not generative, okay? It's derivative, and it's a tool, it's an assistant tool, which is in the same way as we use all sorts of automated stuff that's done on just conventional statistics. And even those need to be overseen by a healthcare professional, qualified healthcare professional. So I don't quite know how to answer that question, because I'm not sure what you mean by legal.
Yeah, I suppose that the cases haven't probably come up yet, in that, there's been a false negative by an AI system and a false negative by a clinician, but the rap's still with the clinician. So, yeah. But it's obviously going to become a complex area in the future as it becomes more difficult to tease apart where the fault lay, which is what legal people love to do, don't they? That's how they make their money. Okay.
But Brendan, just I think it puts more emphasis on our validation, because I think that's the first thing. So how did we validate that system? Yeah. So if there's an issue, then that will be one of the first things you would have thought they would examine. So how was this system put into service? Where's the evidence that it was validated properly, and much as Anna described earlier? So I think that's what makes that has this, whatever we do to validate AI systems has to be as watertight as we can make them.
And that's the scientific method, and that's why healthcare scientists have to be at the center in all our fields. Brilliant. Yep. Okay. There's a question here from Sadie Bennett. What are your thoughts on data sets being used to train AI tools? Does the phrase garage in, garage out hold true? If so, what is being done to build and for these to be shared amongst research teams? Trusted data sets to enable tools to be accurate before being used clinically. Presumably that lies with the industry initially, and then it's for us to validate.
Absolutely. And so obviously she meant garbage in, garbage out, but yeah, no, and some companies are better about it than others. So for instance, I mean, and there's a sort of filter right there. So if a company is absolutely happy to be completely transparent about what they train their data on, you probably want to stick with them. If they start being weird and secretive, then don't trust them. In terms of sharing data sets between research, well, so yes, that's happening at the moment. KCL are trying to produce big data lakes of images and things like that that can be used to train your AI algorithms, and then you reference those public data sets. A lot of companies will consider that their IP and it belongs to them, so they might have paid for that data and they might have spent quite a lot of time curating it, so they'll be loath to give it away for free. So I think there's a market around that. And then in terms of universities holding data, you know, there's always an argument about IP again. So again, that's a legal thing. But yes, I would say that the more companies are transparent about their training data, the better.
Allan, your device, your system is much more directing the clinician to the scientist to actually check an area for specialism, isn't it? It's not so much dependent totally on the machine learning part. Is that right?
It is to a certain extent, and it's dependent on the algorithm that's been designed to detect these abnormal cells. But you're right, the final interpretation is still by a human at the moment, and until we get to that stage of, you know, cutting off the bottom X% as only looked at by the machine, I don't think we've hit some of these problem areas yet. But I'm sure that will be that's the next logical sequence of this. And I think the other next logical sequence at the moment, it just directs you to the cells. The next logical step in the system would be, we think it's a this, do you agree? And I'm sure that is under development as well. Yeah.
Excellent. And what is it's a part question from Sarah Guerrero Appleford, and it's a point that I think you've both already made, is that people are put off by AI, the term, because it used to be called machine learning, and as you said, you've been using it for decades. Correct. Under a different name. It's just become the buzz thing to be AI. But hey, we got a series of webinars out of it, so why not? You know. Okay, I think actually, because obviously one speaker down, you guys have actually taken questions for much longer than you were supposed to, and only the two of you rather than three. Can I thank you both for two absolutely fabulous presentations? It's very evident from the chat that people have really enjoyed this, really, you know, opened their eyes, and also related to their own practice of procurement and using AI and the challenges of AI. Can I thank you both so much for preparing two brilliant talks, which will be available, as I said, on the Academy website. And just thanks very much, and have a very good Christmas and New Year after a great year's work to everyone.
Thanks, Brendan.
Okay, thank you both.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next year. Bye for now.